Hello, Amanda here from the Wichita Workforce Center. We're going to try something new. We know many of you may still be looking for work, so we want to be able to provide you the tools and the resources that you would usually be able to get here at the Workforce Center. Today's focus will be on interviewing skills. We're going to talk about all of the little things that you need to do to prepare for that interview, as well as how you might answer some of those difficult questions. Our overall goal will be to help you feel more confident and prepared for that next interview so you can land the job that you are looking for. So you've got the call you've been waiting on, which is super exciting. And so, of course, there's some celebration. Shortly after, though, those nerves tend to follow. And so I just want to say, it's okay to be nervous. In fact, that is kind of a good motivator to prepare. And so you can channel that energy to help you become more prepared. So, with that being said, our goal really is to help ease some of that nervousness. And so we will go ahead and dive right in here with giving you tips and tricks to help that interview process go more smoother for you. The first thing you want to do is you want to research the company. And the reason for that is really twofold. One, you want to make sure it's going to be a good fit for you, but pretty often an employer will ask you, "What do you know about us?" And so you want to be able to answer that question intelligently. There are a few websites that you can certainly do your research using. One, obviously, being the company website. On the company website, it's usually going to give you information on their products, their services, their mission statement, values, etc. So that's a really great place to start. Of course, with the company website, they're only telling you what they want other people to know about them. So I do encourage you to continue to do your research using some of these other sites like LinkedIn, Facebook, Google News, Twitter, and with Facebook, the nice thing about it is they tend to update it more frequently with current events and things that are going on. Twitter, you can see the company's post as well as consumer posts about the company. On LinkedIn, you're getting more of a professional look of the company. And Google News, you would be able to see any current or reasons why they've been in the news, whether that's new products that are launching or potential financial trouble, etc. Again, to make that decision on whether this might be a good fit for you or not. Plus, once you've done your research, it gives you an idea of what questions you might ask at the end of the interview, which is also really important that we'll talk about later. Next, you're going to want to locate all the things you're going to want to bring with you to the interview. So I would encourage you to bring a few copies of your resume. If you have written a cover letter, go ahead and bring that too. You also want to make sure that you have a copy of your references on a separate sheet of paper, neatly typed out or written out, with phone numbers, addresses, email addresses. And I stress email addresses because a lot of times they are reaching out to people to find out about you through an email like survey. And then, of course, you want to know exactly where you're going. So whether that's a map that you've printed out or if you've programmed it in your phone or GPS already, we also encourage you to go ahead and drive by. And the reason for that is you want to make sure that you're not late. So if you drive by in the evening, make sure that you account for time of day that you would be traveling to that location. So you may want to time yourself, but if you're going to the interview at 8 o'clock in the morning, traffic may be busier. So make sure that you allot enough time so that you are not late arriving to that interview. Once you've gathered those materials, what you're going to do is you're going to put it in a portfolio or some type of folder so that it looks nice, neat, and organized. You can bring some additional items with you if you have letters of recommendation or possibly some examples of projects you've worked on. Anything that you can think of that you might need at the interview, including possibly some identification if they were to hire you right there on the spot. Now to preparing just a little bit more for this interview. In order to truly prepare, I think you have to really understand what you might be walking into. Most of us have probably been to a one-on-one, face-to-face interview. That's pretty typical, so not going to focus there. The next type of interview, which is actually pretty common, is going to be a phone interview. Generally, during a phone interview, they're screening you for your skills, qualifications, availability, why you want to work there, those types of things. But they may also ask you some more difficult questions, some behavioral-based questions, which we'll talk about later. So I always tell people, if you have a phone interview, prepare for it like you would prepare for any other interview. The catch with the phone interview is sometimes you're getting ready to have one, but a lot of times you don't. So I say this, if you're applying for work, prepare that you may have a phone interview at any time. So they may go ahead and send you a date and time for this phone interview, or they may not. They may just call you and say, hey, do you got a few moments to answer some questions? Okay. So here's the catch there. Sometimes it's not the most opportune time for us to put on our game face and start answering those questions. Maybe you've just woken up. Maybe you're in the grocery store. Okay. So here's a couple of pointers. If you look at your phone and you're not quite awake yet, and it's a number you don't recognize, let it go to voicemail. That being said, employers, they really get frustrated if they can't leave a voicemail for the job seekers that are applying. Also, on that note, make sure your voicemail is professional. I cannot stress that enough. You definitely don't want to turn off the potential employer with an unprofessional voicemail. So, if you're just waking up, let it go to your voicemail. Call them back later. Let's say you're in the store and you answer the phone, they catch you off guard. They ask if you have a moment. It's okay to say, I'm really kind of in the middle of something. I want to be able to focus on the questions that you'll be asking me. Is there another time that we could schedule so that I could be able to complete this process with you? So I always tell people that it's okay to do that. It's better to be upfront and honest versus having those distractions or interruptions and not being able to give it your best. So with the phone interview, it is kind of a totally different beast because they're not able to see you. And so you really have to be able to articulate clearly and with some enthusiasm. So I always encourage people, if you can know that you're going to have a phone interview, dress for that interview like you would for an in-person interview. You're going to feel more confident. Plus, make sure that you're standing up. No sitting down or laying down. Your voice doesn't have the ability to project. If you can, stand in front of a mirror. Make sure that you're smiling so that they can hear that smile through your voice. And then, of course, We talked about distractions earlier, but you really want to make sure that you're in a space that is free from distractions, whether that's a dog barking or children, whatever you think could potentially, take your focus away from the phone call and be distracting for you or the interviewer. Just make sure that you try to minimize those distractions the best that you can. The next type of interview that you might walk into is a panel interview. A panel interview can range. I've heard of them being, as small as like 3 to 5 to 15. It kind of depends on the job that you're applying for. But the good news is that it really is a benefit to you, because most of the time that they have these panel interviews, it's to make sure that they're getting a quality hire. So they want to make sure that you're going to be a good fit for everybody and that there's an unbiased opinion. So that really does play in your favor, because if one person doesn't like you and the others do, you may still have a shot. So it's generally not to, make you more nervous or anything like that. So I really want that to put you at ease. Now, sometimes they are seeing how well you handle stress. So I just want to let you know, it isn't something you should be additionally stressed about, because it really can play in your favor. Another type of interview you might walk into, that's a group interview. With a group interview, it's several people applying for the exact same job. So why would they do this? Well, sometimes it's a time saver. Sometimes they're wanting to see how you interact with others and kind of what your personality is like. Are you assertive? Are you friendly, respectful? All of those things. Are you a team player? So I can only give you an example that I had personally. And I feel like from other people that have shared with me similar experiences of a group interview, a lot of times it tends to be something that is done a lot in the sales environment. So for the one that I went to, I think for them it was a time saver, because it was a heavily sales job that wasn't really advertised that way. Then when you got to the interview and you walk in the room and there's all these same people there for the same job that you're applying to, what they did then is they explained the job. After they did that, they kind of said, if you're still interested, you can stay. If you're not, you may leave. And so, I took the door because I wasn't interested any longer. So for them, they knew most people probably wouldn't be interested once they knew the details of the job. So it was just quicker to bring a number of people in, see who was still interested once they knew the real deal, and then to interview them separately from there. Other times, there's another organization that I know of. They may be having you in there more so just to see how you get along with other people. Or it could be a situation where they're going to be hiring a number of people. And again, another time saver, want to be able to hire a number of people from a pool of candidates at one time. Another type of interview is a task-oriented interview. And so that they usually are testing your skill in a certain area, whether that's seeing how you operate a forklift or how you make certain welds. Or maybe they're going to test your selling ability and have you sell a pen to them. So a task-oriented interview could have a number of things that they have you do, but it usually is something that would normally be a routine part of the job that they're wanting you to show them that you can do, that you are capable of actually doing the job. So There's this one company that I know, they actually do kind of a blend of the group interview and a task-oriented interview. They get a group of people together that are applying for the same job. They have them build a display because it's for a retail store. And so with that one, they're seeing, can they build a display? But they're also seeing how well they get along with people and their teamwork skills. Lastly, there is the video interview or Skype interview. So why would they do that? Well, there's a few reasons. One, the corporate office could be out of town. That could be why. Or it could also be a time saver, kind of that pre-screen, but they also get to see you. And so similarly to the phone interview, there's a few things that you want to be aware of there. So I want to give you some pointers on that. One, make sure you have a professional username. So if you currently have an account that doesn't have a professional username, create you a new one. You also want to make sure you dress from head to toe. You may have to get up. You also want to make sure you're free from distractions. An example being, I've heard of a cat jumping on the back of a chair over and over, which was really distracting to everyone. So even things that you might not think about, kind of think out of the box to make sure that you're in a space that's going to be comfortable and minimize those distractions for everyone. Moving on to interview attire. Are these people dressed well enough to go to an interview? What do you think? Most of you probably would say yes, that they look like they're dressed very nicely. They look sharp. And I would agree with you. They look like they are dressed for an interview. The real reason that I chose this picture is actually to point out something else. Take a look at the guy on the end there and his posture. Your presentation is more than just the clothes on your back. So while you're waiting to be called back for this interview, make sure you're sitting up straight. Also, you'll notice almost all of them are on a phone or an iPad except for one lady. Make sure that you're not on your phone while you're waiting to be called back either. In fact, I encourage you just to leave it in your car so that it's not tempting and not distracting. To get more specific on exactly what you should wear to an interview, keep in mind that the most important thing is really that you are clean, that you look well put together. So regardless of what you have, if you can just try to make sure that it's not wrinkled and as clean as possible. Ideally though, for women and men alike, you really want to try to stick with solid colors. You don't want anything too loud of a print. You really want the attention to be on you and not necessarily your clothes. So of course, coordinate a blouse, or for men, a long sleeve button up t-shirt or polo, etc. You want to make sure that for women that you have moderate shoes, limit your jewelry. A lot of times when you're nervous, especially if you have on bracelets and things like that, they might bangle or hit the table a lot and cause some distraction. For men, if you're going to wear a tie, make sure that it's a conservative tie. Also for men, I do strongly encourage you to wear dark socks. If you have, pants on and then you've got white socks and then your shoes, when you sit down, a lot of times the white socks will show. So it just looks more presentable to not have it separated by white socks. You want to make sure, of course, for both men and women alike, that your hairstyle is neat and professional. For women, wear appropriate hosiery. For men and women, Go easy on perfumes and aftershave. Also go easy on any makeup. Make sure that you have neatly trimmed nails, clean nails, and then bring along that portfolio or briefcase. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what you're looking at for attire. Now, depending on what kind of job you're applying for, how fancy or how dressy you get may vary. And so we're going to talk about that as well. So how dressy should you get for this interview? Well, that can be a little bit of a tricky question. It kind of depends on where you're going to interview at. Do they wear business professional attire on a regular basis? If so, you definitely need to dress business professional. For most jobs, I would say at minimum, you need to dress business casual. And so business casual is really, slacks, a coordinated blouse or shirt, and a jacket or a cardigan of some kind. And with the business casual, if they typically wear business casual on a regular basis, it probably wouldn't hurt to go ahead and for the interview dress business professional. It's okay generally to dress a step up from what the job is requiring. But at minimum, I would say business casual, unless they are a business professional type environment, and then you definitely would need to wear that business professional. Now, there are some exceptions. Construction comes to mind. Typically for construction, it's okay to go to an interview in jeans. And so you have to kind of make that judgment call as to what kind of job you're applying to as to what to wear. When we speak of attire and going to interviews, I do like to note that even when you go to job fairs, I probably would say for the majority, business casual is what you would want to wear to a job fair because that is your first impression. And so you want to make sure that you are presenting yourself well, even as you turn in resumes and applications and go to job fairs. Anytime that you're having these interactions with a potential employer, it is like an interview and you should be dressing the part. So now it's time to really dig into the interview questions you might be asked. But first, we have an open book quiz. Since we're doing it this online way right now. So how early should you arrive? As you see there, 10 to 15 minutes early is what I would say. You don't want to be too early. It makes you look a little too anxious. They usually can't get to you any sooner either. So as long as you're between 10 and 15 minutes, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And so you want to make sure you do get there early. So when does the interview start? As you see, we've got a picture of the parking lot here. Most of the time that catches people off by surprise a little bit. They typically feel like it happens when you first walk in the door, etc. But you have to keep in mind that, these buildings, they have cameras on the outside of them. And so they're generally watching you as soon as you pull in. I do have a couple of stories. One is somebody cut off the person that was going to be interviewing them. How awkward would that be? Another one is, they saw the person pull up and they opened their car door and they vomited, and you think, okay, it might just be nerves. But then they vomited again and a beer can fell out. So they are watching you, whether you're throwing your cigarette out or whatever you're doing in the parking lot. So just keep in mind that the parking lot is where the interview begins. So who should you be nice to? Well, you should really be nice to everyone. Anybody at the organization could be an important key player. They may ask other people's opinions of you. If you were friendly coming in and greeting the receptionist, etc., they're going to be asking others of their opinion. A few other tips to recap before we get started into the interview questions. Make sure again that you've left your phone in the car. Don't bring any additional baggage with you. Really just try to bring that portfolio that you have all of your materials in. And then just sit quietly, take a few deep breaths, relax, mentally practice in your head while you're waiting to be called back. So tell me about yourself. That's an awkward question. And a lot of times we struggle with how to answer that, where we're not really sure what they're looking for. So I want to tell you some things that you can say when that question is asked of you. The question really is your first opportunity to sell yourself. Sell yourself professionally. So some things that you can tell them is why you applied, how your past experience, education, or skills relate to the job. The things that you want to avoid telling them include marital status, religion, hobbies, age, or disabilities. The question really is your first opportunity to sell yourself. Sell yourself professionally. So some things that you can tell them is why you applied, how your past experience, education, or skills relate to the job. The things that you want to avoid telling them include marital status, religion, hobbies, age, or disabilities. Why do you want to work for our company? You'll notice that I just have a picture of a bridge here. And to be honest with you, an answer for that is going to vary for each person. And it may even vary for you based on each position you've applied for. So the best thing to do when you're asked that question is to build a bridge, build that connection with the employer. They want to make sure that your reasoning for wanting to work with them is genuine and sincere, not just about a paycheck or the benefits that they offer. So think about, is it your passion? Maybe you have done business with the company and you've seen how great their customer service is and you'd like to be a part of that. Figure out what that connection is that is genuine and sincere and how you may be able to communicate that. Why should we hire you? Well, you have to keep in mind, they have a problem and they're hoping that you can be the solution. So think of all of the things that you bring to the table. How can you resolve their problem? One way that you can figure that out is to really go back to that job description. So try to tie your answer to their job description the best that you can. Have you ever disagreed with your boss? Ooh, that's a sticky question. I'm sure we all have at some point or another. So the key is to make sure that you never badmouth your previous employer or supervisors. They really want to see that you're able to answer the question with some tact, being respectful, being honest, having integrity, and being ethical. So stick with minor disagreements and make sure you end on a positive note. If you had a falling out at your last employer and that led to separation of employment, those are generally the situations I tell people to avoid. Don't use that particular situation that caused that falling out. Make sure you do stick with those minor disagreements, because when you have a chip on your shoulder, sometimes it's hard to make sure that that doesn't come across when you are explaining the situation. So make sure it ends on a positive note and stick with minor disagreements. What are your strengths and weaknesses? With this one, I'm going to tell you, go back to the job description. Find something in that job description that you do really, really well or you excel at. This is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. If you are able to make your strength relevant to the job that you've applied to. For your weakness, keep in mind that less is more. Make sure you're using a professional weakness, but also think about how you're becoming better or stronger in that area. For example, you've probably heard that you should turn your weakness into a strength. And a lot of times people will use sometimes it takes me a little bit longer to do something because I just want to make sure it's done absolutely correct. I'm kind of a perfectionist. Well, employers see right through that. They hear that one over and over and over again. So I'm going to challenge you to actually pick something that may be a struggle for you, but then talk about what you are doing to improve it. So here would be my example. Organization doesn't come naturally to me, but I've found that I'm always in positions in which I have to be highly organized. So I've found that using my Outlook calendars, my phone, getting a really good filing and organizational system set up, and also scheduling time at the end of the week to make sure that I have time to get reorganized, that I stay a whole lot less stressed, and I'm able to meet all of my deadlines. So what I did there is I didn't tell you that I'm not organized. In fact, I told you all of the things that I do to stay organized. So that's how you could talk about your weakness, is talk about the things that you're doing to improve. Another example. Let's say you're not that great at Excel, but you'd like to be better. You could say, I'd like to be more proficient in Excel. Right now, I'm taking classes at the Workforce Center. I'm also watching YouTube videos, and I've even started doing my home budget in Excel to get better. So once again, you've talked about all the things that you're doing to improve in that area. So I challenge you on the weakness question, find something that's fairly minor, not detrimental to the job, and then think about some steps that you can take to show that you're trying to improve in that area. What are your salary expectations? And this is always a hard question, whether it's asked at the interview or on the application. Generally on the application, I would normally tell people to probably write negotiable or put in their minimum amount they'd work for. And so when you're asked this in the interview, you may not know what range they already have in mind. And we generally say whoever talks about money first loses. So you really want to try to turn this back to the employer and ask them what that range may look like for you. So how you could answer that is, what would be the salary or salary range you would normally pay someone with my experience for this position? So what that does is it opens up the door, then potentially for some negotiation. So let's say they come back and they say they start at $12 an hour. Well, if $12 an hour works for you, you can say, great, that's exactly what I was thinking, etc. If $12 an hour doesn't work for you, you might say, well, I would need to at least make $13 an hour in order for me to be able to accept this position. And then that gives them an opportunity to come back, and they may say, well, we do give a potential raise at the end of 90 days based on performance. It can be up to, 75 cents or a dollar. And maybe you're willing to wait the 90 days to see if that brings you up to the 13. Okay. Or maybe they say, well, there's just, nothing that we can really do. We have to start at $12 an hour. We don't have that flexibility to negotiate. At that point, you could bow out gracefully if that's something that you're not wanting to accept. But on the flip side, they could say, well, with your experience and things, I really think that we may be able to go ahead and bump it up to that $13 an hour to begin with. So that opens up that dialogue so you guys can begin negotiating, and it lets them throw out a figure. So then you can make the decision as to what's best for you and your financial situation and how you want to approach that. Behavioral-based questions tend to be the ones that are more difficult, the ones that most people struggle with answering. So I want to talk about those. With the behavioral-based questions, they're not wanting generic answers. In fact, they want to hear a story. And so a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The formula for our behavioral-based questions or our story is SAR, which is situation, action, and result. So you'll talk about all the important details surrounding the situation. You'll describe the action or skills you used. And then you'll talk about the result. What happened after all was said and done. Before we jump into practicing a few of these situational based questions, I want you to write down a couple things because this will be helpful for you. When employers are asking these behavioral based questions, they typically involve a few types of scenarios. And so I want to give you some ideas of what those scenarios might look like. So think about initiative. Think about something ethical or moral. Think about a time you communicated. Think about some times you had conflict, whether that's with a boss, whether it's with a coworker, a customer. Think about a time that you were flexible or you adapted well to change. Think about a time that you were able to multitask or juggle more than one thing. If you get a few of those kind of scenarios surrounding those things, you'll be pretty well prepared for the behavioral-based questions that they are going to be potentially asking you. For example, our first behavioral-based question is, tell me about a time you completed a task without being asked. So which one does that go back to? That one goes back to initiative. Okay? So as we mentioned before, you don't want to be generic. So if it was part of your normal, regular job duties, that's not the example you're going to use. Okay? Here's an example I could throw out here for you. So if that question was asked, somebody might say something like this. Well, I generally operated the fryers, but we were extremely short staffed. There was a busload of students that came in. I'd been cross-trained on the cash register, so I immediately hopped on. I was flipping fries, taking orders, and we got through the line of students within about 10 minutes. My boss came up, he thanked me later. He was really just glad that I just jumped in there and did what needed to be done. So that is an example of a story where I've outlined the situation, given some key things, being short-staffed, there was a busload of students, I was cross-trained, I did the fryers, I did the cash register, I was thanked later. And so that gave us our situation, the action, and the results. Now, as I mentioned before, keeping in mind those potential other types of scenarios. If I had that scenario in my head as maybe one I would use for initiative, let's say they didn't ask me, tell me about a time you completed a task without being asked. Maybe they asked me, tell me about a time you were able to juggle multiple things at one time. I could potentially use that same example because now that's also a multitasking story. So what you'll find is a lot of your stories kind of overlap. So of course you would never use the same story twice in an interview, but once you kind of start thinking about those scenarios and develop your stories, then regardless of what they ask you, you're able to kind of throw in that story to potential questions that it may be fitting for. So another situational based question that might be pretty common is describe a time you succeeded at work because of your ability to communicate. Another example of one would be, give me an example of a time you made a significant mistake. So with that one, you not only want to give, the situation, the action you took, and also what you did to fix the issue, obviously, if you made a significant mistake. But also think about what you learned. What did you do to make sure you didn't ever make that mistake again? So don't forget to add that key component to that as well. What questions should you ask at the end of the interview? The worst thing you can do is not have any questions, because then that shows that you're not really interested, or at least that's the impression that it leaves. So with the questions at the end, here's a few ideas if you're really having a hard time coming up with your own questions. You might ask, what is the timeline for getting back to candidates with next steps? You could ask them to describe the culture, find out exactly how you'll be introduced to the job, if there would be training provided. You could ask how you'd be evaluated or the performance goals for the position. You could even ask what the biggest challenges are that somebody might face in that position. What opportunities there were for growth or advancement in the company. You could even ask what they enjoy about working at that particular company. And that's a good question to kind of get a feel for if they even like working there, and to get an idea of that culture again. Or you could ask, where do you see the company in the next 5 years? In the beginning, we talked about researching the company. And I told you we'd talk about questions for later to really, really impress them. If you can come up with some unique questions based on your research, that is definitely going to be more powerful. Last but not least, you really should send a thank you note. So you could even have this already in your portfolio when you go to the interview. That way, when you're done, you could finish filling it out, put it in the mailbox, and it should be there the next day. Or you could hand it to the receptionist as well. A thank you note may be what actually sets you apart, especially if there's two equally qualified candidates, but one sends a thank you and one does not. If you're unable to do a personalized thank you card, then you could do an email as well. Would encourage you to wait about 2 weeks generally before attempting contact unless you were told otherwise. And then when you contact them, when you're double checking on, what the status of the interview is, if for some reason they tell you that they have gone with another candidate, would encourage you to ask for feedback. It's okay to say something like, well, I'm disappointed that I didn't get the job, but more than anything, I just really want to learn from this experience. Do you have any feedback that I could use to improve for the next time? And they may or may not be able to provide you any information on that. But if they do, then you can use that to hopefully improve before your next interview. Sometimes you've done everything right and you still haven't gotten the job. And I can tell you that personally, when I've asked for feedback on an interview in the past, that was exactly the case. It was a matter of who someone knew. It was an internal candidate. So I say that because it can be kind of depressing when you're job searching and you continue to be rejected time after time. But sometimes, your interview is fine. It is really about who you know. So just because you didn't get the job doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't interview well, but you want to take time to reflect after each interview and think about the areas in which maybe you could improve on your interview. All right, so we're at the end here. Usually this presentation is given live, face-to-face. So I won't be able to answer your questions immediately, but I encourage, if you do have questions, to reach out to me. I'd love to be able to answer any questions that maybe you have about interviewing that I did not answer through our session. And so if you have any questions, you can email me. It's ahill@workforce-ks.com. So A as in Amanda, Hill, HILL, at workforce-ks.com. Any interview questions, I'd be happy to answer those. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible with any of those questions that you have. Also, if you have any feedback, this is really our first time doing this to where we're presenting online. So any feedback or suggestions that you have for future workshops, virtual workshops, please let me know as well. And thank you so much for listening to me. Have a great day.